Oh shit, what's up? The meatheads. The salty
Meatheads
sea dog.
podcast is pleased to have Jarod Sicotte on.
Fuck yeah.
Thanks, glad to be here.
Yeah, did I mispronounce your last name just now?
Yeah, it is Sicotte, but it's probably not really historically accurate either.
Yeah, because I mean, you have some Italian in you. So I was wondering if that could be Sicotte or no. I might just.
No, it's actually French.
Okay.
Yeah, my
Sounds kind of French.
family on my granddad's side is Quebecois.
Okay.
Yeah, no. But so we say Sicotte, but that's just sort of like Canadianizing it a bit. I think it was probably Sicotte.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fuck yeah. So
Okay.
are you done the term with school? You just have exams and shit?
Yeah, one more exam on Thursday. It'll be interesting.
Ugh, I know.
She gives us 4 questions, and we have to answer 2 of them when the day actually comes.
Right.
So I know what I have to study, but
Oh,
studying, it's the
mine's
hard part.
similar. It's like we've got subjects, but we don't have the questions themselves.
Mm.
So it's like a weird one where we can kind of study and get ready for it, but we don't know what question we're going to answer. Obviously with some options, but God. And then I have another one fucking Monday. One Saturday, one Monday. That's brutal. Like, it's like Saturday morning, rise and shine, go write an exam.
Better than Saturday
But-
night.
Yeah, totally.
brutal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wrote one once. It was Saturday night, the night before flying to Mexico.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And it was like we'd already booked the tickets, and so it was just
Yeah.
crossing my fingers and hoping
Yeah.
that my exam would be finished before we had to leave. Otherwise,
Yeah.
I would have had to cancel the trip.
I'm gonna fucking. We're going to Vancouver to go to Mexico like Monday night. So I'm gonna write an exam, get my shit together, head to fucking Vancouver, and then start fucking heading to Mexico and hope I don't get stolen by the cartel and my organs sold and shit, you know, or whatever.
That's a lovely thought.
You can always hope.
Maybe fucking, I don't know, at least I'm like used for science or fucking. Does that mean somebody gets my organs, which means they would needed them? So
Maybe.
it's good,
Possibly.
but like, you know,
I mean, can you attribute a lot of that to the American healthcare system, or can't you?
right?
Oh, that's kind of funny.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're here to talk about climate change and international relations. Now, I understand that you've done a fair bit of research about this.
Yeah, I've looked into it from time to time. It's funny that we're all here. Actually, the first time that I ever got into it was in a class that I took with both of you guys. That was
Really?
international security.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
Okay.
I think one of the final articles that we had to read was called "Planet Politics: A
Right.
Manifesto from the End of IR," and that one was basically saying that like the current political sort of theory that's dominant in our state and state system is based on this conception of states being entities that are sovereign in their power within a certain drawn out geographical area, right?
Weber, right? The whole like a state is it's a defined boundary and it's got the monopoly on the use of force within that boundary kind of idea.
Yeah, exactly. And so we sort of we've created this system of international relations upon that sort of idea that in terms of politics, there's really nothing that is supreme to the state.
Yep.
And international relations then becomes about what happens between the states rather than what happens above the states. Now, the problem with that when you go to climate change is that climate change is obviously a problem that has no borders. And it's not a problem that has no borders. And I say this definitely not in a way to like minimize these issues, but it's not a problem that has no borders in the way that you could say that sort of like non-ethically sourced products are used, conflict minerals. You know what I mean? That's a problem that doesn't really have borders. But that's a problem that can be solved by state and interstate cooperation and like by lawmaking. Whereas climate change is a problem that really it has no sort of start or end even relevant to the state system. So you have a whole bunch of states, 200 plus, that are all respecting each other's sovereignty to make their own decisions. Meanwhile, all of those countries, including the most powerful countries, and for the most part, the most powerful countries, are including this pollution, and they're still treating it as if it's an issue that should be relegated to sovereign states to make their own decisions about. Whereas countries can just say, well, it's in my national best interest to ignore climate change. That's actually paraphrasing Stephen Harper at one point, where he said that no country is going to take substantial environmental measures if it harms the economy.
Yeah, that's pretty short-sighted, though.
Yeah, of
extremely.
course that's short-sighted, because you have all these damages and things to pay for. But
I find it pretty fascinating, actually, that China is taking it so seriously.
Yeah.
Like, they don't have to do jack shit. They're one of the most powerful countries in the world, and it would almost be, it would definitely be in their short-term interests to completely ignore it and do what the fuck they want.
Oh yeah, like
But-
the pollution that comes from China is, and I mean a lot of it comes from Canadian and American consumer, like North America specifically, is the worst for the worst in the world for importing pollution in general, and that I think for Canada brings them up from like the 14th highest polluter in the world to the second highest. When you look at like pollution that gets imported from other countries,
Not just what we produce.
not just like what we produce, what we burn, but all the plastic that we buy that's been done in coal run factories in China, that sort of thing, right? And so as long as some countries continue to ignore this, especially the most powerful countries, the most industrialized countries, continue to ignore this and treat it as a sovereign issue, then there's no real way of fighting it specifically. So that's why in that manifesto, I can't remember the name of the authors in it, but that's why they're calling for a sort of special place for the planet as its own type of politics within international relations, where that there is a sort of force that can have authority within sovereign states to help fight this.
Right. That's interesting. But then obviously the problem is that you've got sovereign states that are not going to want to do that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's always going to be in somebody's best interest to hang on a little longer.
Right.
I mean, not to like say actually forget them, but forget the United States for this example. India is a good country for this, because India is still a country that is most people would say they're still developing. They're still working on a lot of the sort of societal problems. I don't think that we haven't had in Canada or in North America for a while now, and developed countries for a while now. And so they're sort of struggling with the fact that they don't have the economic capability to switch away from, I think it was HFCs. Is that what we're talking about? Hydrofluorocarbons. That's what's used in old school types of refrigeration, right? And that's something that in the Paris Agreement we said that we were getting rid of in Canada in like the next 10 years or something like that. But countries like India have to allow for economic development that can replace HFCs.
Right. That's one of the biggest arguments that you see from those countries. Like, what you're telling us that we have to stop using fossil fuels, for example, even though you guys are the ones that have used it for the past 200 years and got rich off of it, and now we're supposed to foot the bill of going to renewable energy, right?
You know, I think what should be done about that is technological leapfrogging, but in the sense of energy consumption.
Right. And
the problem is, though, is that there isn't there is, but it's up for debate whether or not the technology is ready to be leapfrogged.
Right, exactly.
I find there's an interesting triangle between war and climate change and like oil, I guess you would say. Should I continue? Yeah. So whereas, oil is obviously a massive source of pollution, and war is also a massive source of pollution.
Right.
And where is a lot of the highest conflict in the world being fought right now? Mm-hmm. And it's in the oil-producing countries, and it's being fought about oil. Right. I mean, I have a friend who actually it would have been great if he could appear today. He's a really great guy. His name is Efe, and he's from Turkey, and he was just telling me about how sometimes in Turkey, when you go to a gas station, you're buying gas from ISIS, and you just I'm pretty sure it's that you can recognize the chains and stuff like that, but there's not too much you can do about it.
Right.
Either, right? So a lot of the time they are buying gas from ISIS.
Interesting.
Or I guess they were buying gas from ISIS. ISIS is pretty much down and done for now.
Right.
But that's one interesting thing to think about is that war is being fought over oil, and both of those are massive sources of pollution. What happens if the world gets to the point where oil wars aren't being fought in oil-producing countries? I feel like that really brings down the demand for war and for oil, and those are both highly environmentally destructive.
Right.
Just another kind of weird thing to think about, I think, in that sort of situation.
I was reading a paper for a paper that I wrote on nonviolent resistance, basically, kind of comparing it to violent resistance, and basically the one guy that was saying exactly that the military itself is such a huge driver of environmental destruction and pollution, but it's kind of its own sphere. Like, we talk about industry, we talk about everything, but we never talk about the military when we talk about pollution. And basically he's saying, like, if we encourage nonviolence, we're gonna discourage the military, and then another source of, like, what you're just talking about.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, who's to even measure the amount of pollution that we're putting up by bombing oil fields in the Middle East?
Yeah.
Right? Like Trump just bombed Syria the other day.
Yeah.
And you just look at it, it's like, not to mention, obviously all the human destruction, all of the, I believe in Syria still there's a big concern about, like, historical ruins, ancient artifacts being demolished and stuff like that. It's been a massive problem. We can talk about Hobby Lobby later, but
I think there's even already observations being made about certain aspects of the health in general of the Iraqi population, aside from the whole part about war fucking them up entirely. The amount of bombs that have been dropped in Iraq is starting to mess with people's genetics.
Right.
That's insane.
It's like depleted uranium babies. If you ever look that up, it's pretty fucked up.
Yeah.
It's like,
that's messed up.
They shoot bullets with, I guess, uranium in them, or whatever they're using, and then, years after the war, there's kids, like, playing around and touching this stuff, and then they get, it's passed on through the genes, and there's kids getting born with, like, fucked up mutations and horrible stuff.
And it's not even necessarily anything to do with nuclear bombs or slightly radioactive technology. It could sometimes just be the residue from a bomb which has got some fucking chemicals in there. It's just messing people up.
No, it's and I think, like, the huge thing about climate change and IR, international relations, is the fact that it's like how you can't conceptualize the environment being another threat, as well as, Russia might be a threat. Some African states might be threats to each other, and they think about it in that way, like a threat to the state. But the threat of climate change is a threat that you have to reconceptualize the entire idea of what a threat is.
Yeah, well, like,
that's a very realist paradigm,
right?
Yeah, like economics is another state weapon.
Right.
As much as we sort of consider it a harmless one, that might be fairly inaccurate when you actually look at it. But as much as we consider it to be a fairly harmless form of violence, economic sanctions, all those sorts of things, they do play a big role in it. So obviously when you have countries that are racing to trying to think of something that we're racing to really, like, accomplish right now. Nobody's trying to get to the moon these days or anything.
Right.
But
nuclear weapons is still a thing.
AI.
Like
I don't know. Maybe AI.
Race. Putin was just talking a week or two ago about these new ICBMs that they have that would completely make NORAD useless.
Right.
Right. So there's always these sorts of economic competitions, right? Like, I know South Korea and the United States are fairly friendly, but you've got Samsung competing with Apple. You've got all these sorts of things, right? What happens if, like, not exactly to talk about climate change, but to talk about like something else I brought up earlier? What happens if all of a sudden both of those countries say no production of electronics using conflict minerals at all, right? What does that do to the race between Apple and Samsung and, you know, all the other phone companies, that sort of thing, right? What happens when, you know, one country actually says, you know what, no, we're gonna stick it to the oil and gas industry or something like that. We're gonna pay for everybody to have hybrid cars or something like that, or electric cars. What happens at that point to the economic competition between countries? And that's something else entirely that nobody's, I think, even really addressing, because they're just trying to bring in these measures that suit everybody's economy individually, and that's not progressive, I guess.
Right. It's like the thing with conflict minerals, right? There's, I think, Afghanistan, I think China, and I think parts of Africa especially. They have, like, I think it's cell phones need like 70 or 80 types of these, you know, special metals to make, like, one is like goes into making the thing that makes your phone vibrate, and it's like, what the hell? You know, who the hell thought of that? But the thing is, I want my phone to be able to vibrate, even though, like, I personally don't use it, but it's in there. And yeah, like, say, what if that country that sources that stuff, you know, it has a change of government, or the people finally say, fuck this, we don't want to be supporting that. And then, you know, that they could get invaded for that kind of shit these days. Like, yeah. I mean,
so I'm curious, Jared.
Pretty intense.
Do you have any sort of suggestion
to fight
like any sort of
climate change is an international problem?
No, just in particular. I mean, yes, we'll get to that.
Is climate change even real?
But just this about like the dynamic of the dynamics of competition between countries, and say one country decides to go full on climate change fighting or full green, that sort of thing.
Besides international socialism, and I'm sorry, that's just a joke.
Troll there, yeah, fair enough.
I saw a meme the other day that was, you know, if Karl Marx came back in 2018 and you told him all about the world today, he wouldn't give a shit about communism. He would just be so damn thrilled that we made it to the moon. But right. Anyways, but no, I think that like interstate cooperation. I think a lot of it's going to be, I think there's two big factors, and one I hope prevails and one I hope doesn't need to. The one that sort of that you don't want is obviously urgency, is to the point where everybody is so completely fucked by like how bad the environment is getting that it just becomes so obviously slap you in the face.
Yep.
Smart and efficient to go environmental, but I
think
that's
the tendency, though.
Worst case scenario, yeah. I think that the other thing, and I think that it's something that is hard to sort of catch on to, because we're so used to seeing industry be regressive, is an industry based start to this, and I mean, like, the Silicon Valley is going so like full on investing in green competition right now, right? Everybody's trying to get that leap. Everybody's trying to have that environmental solution, because they know that at some point in the future, there's going to be massive costs associated with fixing this or with preventing this. And they want to be taking advantage of that, right? So my best hope is that it just becomes smart business, and I hope that people see that sooner rather than later.
I think that's what Elon Musk is doing, actually.
Yeah. People like Elon Musk are really, really good for it. And I mean, he's inspired a whole lot of other people too, right? Like, self-driving cars, electric cars. The BMW i Series is obviously not affordable for most people, but
I mean,
let
Tesla
the rich
is
people
trying
have
to
their
make
electric cars, man.
Tesla is trying to make their stuff more affordable, though. And but I like to kind of poke at your question. I think it'll get to a point, like the tipping point, where I think people will eventually see that green economics, in a sense, can still be profitable, and that they'll see it, they'll get in early, in a sense, and.
Everything is profitable.
Right, exactly. I mean, who says you can't make money off of solar panels, right?
Exactly. And I mean, not to talk up like Royal Dutch Shell in particular, but you do see a whole lot of ads from Shell where they're investing in a whole lot of sustainable electricity projects and stuff like that, right? A lot of that sort of stuff, to speak real about it, is kind of like apologetic, sort of saying like, hey, we're going to keep on polluting, but here, look at this other good thing we're doing.
Yeah, it's like corporate social responsibility. They're trying to look good, but they're still pumping your gas. I mean,
yeah, right. So there is that sort of aspect to look at it, but I think that industry has almost recognized that there's an urgency in it. And I think that the big change is going to be when the energy business, which right now is mostly oil and gas, says, hold on a second, we have the capital to just turn the world green. Because who else has the capital to just, take 50,000 oil rig workers and all of a sudden put them to work manufacturing windmills, stuff like that, right?
And the capital exists right now,
of
right?
Sorry?
The capital exists right now.
Yeah, it completely exists, and all it takes is a divestment.
Yeah, that's the thing. A lot of people, like, I've always, like, I would like them to spend more money on, like, science, research, education, things like that. And, some people might say, well, where do you get the money? It's like, well, it's not about where do you get it. It's about what you spend your money on. And, the military, obviously you kind of still need it, but the amount that's being spent on it and the amount that's being spent on some things is just absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I heard that I just saw like a few monetary figures, but the amount of money that the United States spent bombing Syria 2 or 3 nights ago, that amount of money could have adjusted pay raises for all the teachers in the nation, as well as like completely like fixing Flint, Michigan.
Right. It's one of those things.
It's like one of those things. It's about priorities, right?
Like the amount they spent on the Iraq War could have ended world hunger, and
let's spend public money on killing people versus spending money on helping people.
Yeah, it's very strange. It's like
$70 billion in tax cuts, and you can't afford pencils for kids.
It's unfortunate. It's that's the thing. It's what you spend your money on. It's like fucking priorities, right?
Yeah, and like once again, like the thing that gets me is that like so much of this money that's being turned into the wrong spots by governments is doing so. Like if you said like you look at the United States military budget, they're making the climate worse by going to war to fight over oil, which changes the climate. And the necessity of so much war in the Middle East is drastically depleted as soon as the necessity for oil is. Sorry, I know I kind of already said that, but
the oil is like it's a big thing. It's something to fight over in a sense. In what the role that it plays right now, it's something to fight over, and like
it's a simple concept which can't be stated enough, really.
Yeah.
So
and I mean it's simple enough for people. I think here, like anybody who at 17 can, get a high school job, work, save up for a year, and buy themselves a car, right? I think people in Canada, right, where we have, or at least like I guess I'm speaking from like a semi-affluent upbringing, but for people like us in Canada who are brought up this way, it seems easy to just say, okay, let's switch to electric cars, right? Let's just do something like that. But yeah, there is that whole other part about where we forget that so much of how we live is based on wants and not needs.
Yep.
But other parts of the world, right? What happens if you live in the Middle East or if you live in South America, and all of a sudden you can't use your Jeep to get to work or something like that.
Yeah, I was thinking
right?
about like when me and Malcolm were in Indonesia. If we were to tell one of those people, like, look at you riding this silly motorbike that's super inefficient, they wouldn't even know what to think. Like it would be like, what the fuck are you talking about? What planet are you coming from right now? Like, I can't, it's outrageous.
Yeah.
But I think then I've heard some arguments or some proposals that the really rich countries should help pay for or invest in other countries to develop renewable technology, right? But
I don't know if they should pay for it, but investing in it.
Invest in it, and then
that's interesting.
That's a weird one.
Like if there's some sort of dividends that come out of it,
exactly.
So it's not a complete, sort of cash grab.
I know, like China is investing billions in Africa.
And that's great for their diplomacy too. That's really
rail networks all across, like the continental Africa, Asia.
Right.
That has everything to do with China's sort of, their diplomatic policy is about peaceful rise to power, and they're doing it really well all by investing. Yeah. Like they give unconditional grants to poor countries, and while that may be questionable in terms of morality, it's great for diplomacy, and it's great for stability.
I wonder how how much, like, I wonder if there's a Chinese official that's kind of like, you can spend this any way you want it, but if you invested in my highway project, I'll be very happy with you, kind of thing. But I wonder, like,
there's that old joke,
the good faith thing, What's that?
Oh, it's a terrible joke. Okay, so there's a Chinese diplomat and an African diplomat. So he's from, I don't know, wherever. The African diplomat visits the Chinese official in his hometown, and he's like, he shows up the house, like, wow, this is a really nice place.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and he's the Chinese guy's like, so that highway that you drove in, and the African's like, yeah, of course. It's like, the Chinese official points at his chest, like 10%.
Right.
Oh, yeah, sure. And so a couple years later, the Chinese official goes and visits the African official, and he's like, and he shows up at his house. He's like, wow, this house is amazing. Where'd you get all the money? And the African official is like, that highway that you came in on? And the Chinese official is like, what highway? The African's like, points at his chest, he's like, 100%.
Right.
Like, it's such a fucking brutal joke, but it's kind of funny.
Yeah, that's good shit. Oh, man. Yeah, no, it's a crazy one. Like, I mean, I totally like the idea of states helping other undeveloped states or developing states, develop and not just be, trashing the planet as they do it. But it's weird, like, at what point is it really in good faith and trying to help them out? What are you trying to get out of it? And is there even anything wrong with profiting from helping other states like that, investing in them or whatnot?
Yeah, well, it comes down to, like, sort of like your basic conception of, like, like humans being, like, here is a reason, and, like, having a reason to sort of have each other's backs, or, like, whether we are you a moral person or are you a business person? Not to really make that like a zero-sum equation, but I don't know. I saw it in a documentary recently. It was funny. One thing about China that you guys were sort of bringing up is I think probably the highest graded paper I ever wrote was in international relations class, where there's this paper by a guy named G. John Eikenberry that was called The Future of the Liberal World Order. And he was basically asserting that, and I think this paper was fairly dominant when it first came out, it really sort of, I guess, encouraged the American ideology, if that makes sense. And it was basically asserting that internationally there are too many pressures for China to liberalize, for it to hold on as an illiberal power. 5 years later or whatever, I'm going to butcher his name, Xi Jinping, is that it?
Yep.
He's all of a sudden president for life of China, right, constitutionally.
So he's officially. I didn't know that. I knew he was going for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, they passed a constitutional amendment saying there's no presidential term limits.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so he's officially a president for life. You know, they structurally they have a government that he isn't supposed to be in complete dictator-like control of, but I think we can all sort of see what's going on there.
So the Communist Party is still in power, even though it doesn't look like it on the surface, sort of.
No, yeah, exactly like that. So he's been made dictator for life, more or less. And now you're seeing all of these sort of articles in the New York Times and stuff popping up, like, we thought China would join the West. It didn't. Here's what happened, sort of stuff like that.
You thought China would join the West?
Yeah, and that was my exact whole thing, was that when I saw that G. John Eikenberry article, The Future of the Liberal World Order, where he said, America, don't worry, China's gonna fall in line with you, and France and England and and Canada and everybody else. And I said, really? Because China owns the United States debt. China has a massive economy where they manufacture goods that are used all over the planet, to the point where if China just stopped, we wouldn't know what to do.
Right.
And I did the research, and I pointed to all these other factors that are saying China really doesn't have reason to liberalize for this specific reason. And I looked at, a decent bunch of sources.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I got an A+ on it, and it's just like, but that's the thing, is that when you have that sort of economic power, when you have that power over, the previous hegemon, outgoing hegemon, I think some people would say, the United States, when you own whatever it is, 7% of their debt, and it's creeping up into the trillions of dollars, then what can you what can you really do to have pressure on them, right? They don't feel. I think it's obvious that with this ascension of Jinping now, is that they don't feel this need to join the West as 20th century liberal democracies. They feel like they can provide a good, industrious, whatever you want to call it. They feel like they can provide a good life for their people with their current system.
Yeah. It works for them because, there's not a lot of rights, so to say, for the people, but so they could really get things done. If they want to build a highway right through a bunch of houses, it doesn't matter. They can do it, and it works for them, even though obviously there's huge downfalls.
Speaking of what you just mentioned, building a highway through a bunch of houses, I saw earlier today a little piece on how in Japan, a company used to have like a one-story factory on this plot of land, but it was in like downtown in this city, and they decided that they wanted to build an office building there and like rent all the office spaces out and make millions of dollars off of it. But the city had already planned. Oh my god, my voice is cracking so much. The city had already planned.
Need more beer.
I'm kind of sick now, I think. I'm looking like I might be. The city had already planned to snake a highway over the building,
Jesus.
like a bridge-style highway over the building. But they said, no, we're not a one-story factory anymore. We're building a high-rise. So now they have a tunnel going actually through the middle of this building that they've built.
Badass.
Took 5 years of negotiations. And it's now known as the Beehive.
Right.
That's pretty awesome.
Pretty cool place.
Honestly, that is like
sorry, that was a weird tangent.
A crazy example of like people figuring shit out, working together. Like
Definitely.
there is no here it would be like, we are literally gonna take the top off that building, or one person is getting their way, but this is like they just kind of made both sides happy. That's insane.
It's pretty phenomenal, honestly.
So you mentioned towards the beginning of this part, some sort of supra-state authority for planetary politics. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
I was wondering if you could just
of.
clarify that. Go into it a little further.
Yeah, well, I think that what it sort of boils down to is having basically having an exception for the environment and basically saying that, hey, you know, like, all of these things that we have come to cherish because of this current system that we have, all of that is at risk unless we can put this one thing as a priority, right? And that doesn't mean, like, it's obviously it's all relative, because every country by doing that is going to have to surrender stuff. And the developed countries, the powerful ones, more so than others, it seems.
Really, you think so?
Well, I think that for people who are so accustomed to, you know, driving gas cars, having, you know, all of this packaged up stuff available on the free market, right? Like not to bring food too much into it too, but like one of the massive other things about climate change is like having like something like 100-mile diet or something like that, where you don't really have to rely on big food chains with really inefficient ways of distributing food to feed you. But anyways, that's sort of getting past it. So I think that, yeah, obviously everybody's going to have to make economic sacrifices, and maybe the countries that have grown more used to pollution-friendly lifestyles are going to have a harder time with it, at least politically, if not logistically.
Okay.
I think that's a good way to put it, because logistically, obviously, they have more opportunity.
Yeah. So
politically, it's a harder battle to fight, I think.
So are you suggesting that there's some sort of mechanism to force people to do it? Or any sort of coercion?
I don't think so. Like I said, I think a lot of it's going to have to come out of necessity in the end. But,
sure, yeah, like the consequences of climate change, that'll be coercion enough in itself eventually.
Yeah, but I think that there will be a lot of, at the time, interstate cooperation to sort of make it a friendly transition.
And I think we can see that in some instances too, which is good.
Yeah, because
I think it's already starting to happen.
I think that at least among the developed and like I'm not too sure what you would call like countries that are creeping into the developed world, but like not like they wouldn't really still call developing.
Shitty developing countries, right?
Yeah,
and then right, shithole countries, as Trump said, and then them working with other countries, right? And getting into this model, like joining, kind of like, I don't know, because I think developing countries, I think the big thing for the developed countries is they have these massive stakes in the status quo, whereas developing countries, they like, you know, they don't have the opportunity to divest, but they're not invested in fossil fuels per se. Or at least as much. So I think that in that sense, it's a possibility they could do the whole leapfrog thing and just skip shitty, you know, gas guzzlers and go straight to Teslas or whatever.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
Yeah.
No, and I think that there is sort of that demand. I mean, to skip sort of like I guess more like developed country or developing country examples. Like I think Malaysia is really low-lying. There's a few more island nations that are going to be basically completely wiped out by rising sea levels and that sort of thing, right?
Yeah, Mauritius is almost gone.
Yeah, right. But a good example that I think people in the developed world might sadly be more empathetic to is or sympathetic to would be Venice. Because Venice is right now in the midst of a multi-billion-dollar project to basically have like floating dams that control the sea level for the city.
Yeah. That's so insane.
And it's phenomenal to look at. And my parents are going in September, and I'm going to get my dad to take a whole bunch of pictures of the project because it looks awesome.
Nice.
But yeah, so you see it like a state like Venice, which is getting seriously fucked by these rising sea levels.
Yeah, there's some U.S. states as well, right, that are...
I bet New Orleans.
Yeah, a lot of them are...
People with beach houses in, like, Los Angeles.
Yeah.
They're scared. There's, like... What, aren't people, like, now when people are building like beach houses and stuff in coastal areas in the States, aren't they building them up on like
Stilts.
higher supports and stuff like that now?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
To like compensate for crazy
Watch like the market will crash and you'll have hobos living in like the beach houses until it gets
underneath
too late.
the stilts.
Yeah. Oh man, that's crazy though. I mean, it's pretty insane because that's, sea level rise is just like one small example. I think it was that same class we were looking at some that IR class where we looked at some data on droughts, and then along the drought lines there would be drone strikes. So they were correlating in the paper that where you have it's like kind of environmental violence where you have a drought and then poverty and then you have violence and you have terrorism and then you have the reaction to terrorism, which is drone strikes. So it's this weird, it's kind of a complicated correlation or connection between the effects of climate change and military violence, which is pretty insane. And that's just another tiny example. There's like a lot. There's climate change, and then there's fucking species dying off, and that's gonna suck because everyone likes frogs and shit, and which are being turned gay. We were talking yesterday about Alex Jones and shit, and how the frogs are getting turned gay from chemicals.
That was the last
in the water,
episode, yeah.
And that's another thing. Like, who fucking knows? But yeah.
No, I mean, like, it's not to sound like a crazy communist or anything like that. But I think that it's pretty obvious that so much of this is attributable to capitalism, and to sort of this greedy lifestyle of producing in excess, producing for consumers, producing for wants and not needs. And it's like greedy lifestyles that attribute to it. And I'm on the fence about whether or not I actually believe that like ethical, environmentally friendly capitalism can be ever universally achieved, because I feel like most times when people talk about ethical business spaces, ethical workspaces, there's a lot of sort of outsourcing of the unethical stuff that happens. But I like to think that there's hope for, to say that 100 years from now that people can have relatively similar life experiences that people have now or 30 years ago, something like that. But I think that taking a rein on, like, pulling the reins on capitalism and saying that, you've got to stop fucking things up so hard, can have a good dent, like can make a good dent at this sort of problem.
Yeah. Do you want to fucking pause it? Go part 2 or some shit? Where are we at?
We got 6 minutes left.
Yeah. Fuck yeah. I was gonna say, like, I think the question of whether we can still have capitalism and address the problem of climate change is a huge debate, because I don't think capitalism is really going anywhere, and I don't see what you could replace it with. I mean,
it's like the worst system except for all the other ones. You can say the same thing about democracy.
Exactly, but then
it's fucking terrible. It's just the alternatives are shit.
Exactly, but I think it's a question of making capitalism work with it and having like green capitalism where it's. But I mean, it's weird. I've heard arguments on the other side that say, the energy going into producing a windmill or a solar panel is still polluting the planet, is still fucking things up. So it's a weird one. But I think, honestly, I think like human ingenuity, the fact that you see where we've gone. I just want to
address that. The suggestion that the energy or the resources going into producing a windmill fucks up things more than, say, a combustion engine. Like, let's think about that for a second.
No, I know.
So the energy going into a combustion engine itself, sure, it may not be, or in the resources too, not just energy, may not be that much compared to a windmill, but the combustion engine then produces all of this pollution by the nature of its operation.
It just keeps going.
Whereas, producing a windmill, you produce one windmill one time, and then it's giving you green energy for
I've
the
heard
life
like it'll take like 2 or 3 years, and then it'll have paid off itself.
What's that?
Sounds like a good business plan.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's a weird thing. It's like it'll take a few years, and then it'll have paid for itself, and then it's just running clean energy.
It's just profit.
But like I don't know. I've heard arguments on either side, like with solar panels, that you can only use them for so long, and then they turn to shit, and then you can't even recycle them, kind of thing. But I honestly have a lot of hope in science and technology and just human ingenuity. If you look how far we've come in the last 100 years, it is fucking staggering. Like that we're talking barely, 100 years ago is, the end of the First World War. They were using fucking horses in that war. They were using horses, and
Yep.
I mean, you can look at like at least in environmental progress, if not human progress, that environmentally we've come as far in the past 2 years as we did in the 5 before that.
Right.
And in those 5, we came as far as we did in the 20 before that, and then the 50 before that, sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
That's pretty encouraging.
So that is one good thing to look at, is that if you look at it as sort of like a what would you say, performance over time sort of thing, we're really looking good. Like, we're really efficient now.
We just have to keep up the progress.
Yeah, but that's at the same time, a lot of that is industry. Some of it is politics, but a lot of it does come down to industry. One of the actually, I think, the most hilarious things that's ever happened in terms of like oil and gas being a major polluter is the oil crisis of the 70s.
Yeah, I think it was late 70s,
crisis,
right?
Yeah, where and now gas costs, well, these days like 3 times as much, but like when it happened, gas went up double the price and never really went down after, right?
Right.
And that's sort of one of those things where it's like, if that oil crisis never happened, and we were paying 84 cents a liter at the tank and thought that was expensive, what would the world be like?
Right. It's a weird one.
All right, stuff like that. So at least it's become more expensive to pollute, and it's become actually I think it was true like in the early 70s, or like when this gas crisis was happening, people were coming up with ideas basically for like modern fuel efficiency, right? There were guys in the 70s and 80s who were claiming to have 80 mpg combustion engines, and they were getting bought out by the big 3.
Right.
Yeah.
We love that idea. How about we apply it in all our cars? Like, we'll give you $5 million for it.
There's that whole thing about there's like an electric car way back in the day, like early days of cars, and it got bought out and like just got rid of it, kind of idea. But I mean, yeah, who knows about that one? It's like the whole marijuana thing. Like, the reason they fucked over marijuana is because Hirsch guy or whatever, he ran paper mills and was like, oh shit, this stuff's way better than paper, so we're gonna just discredit it. And then the whole marijuana scandals and bullshit, like black people are eating babies or whatever,
and look where that got us.
Yeah,
we're
exactly.
going legal sometime this year.
Yeah, it's still illegal. I mean, people are still getting thrown in jail for that shit.
In America,
yeah.
In the States, I think that obviously, like, kind of ignoring it like racially, but just tidy things up. I think in the States, things actually got a lot worse in the later half of the 20th century with like the war on like obviously like the Nixonian war on drugs sort of thing.
Fuck
but
the war on drugs, man.
But I think like at least for I think white people in the States, like the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s probably weren't that bad for smoking pot.
Yeah,
and that's just sort of like a fucked thing to put up in context.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're going to wrap up this first part.
Yeah.
We're going to come back to the second part as soon as we can.
It's been awesome.
Peace out, motherfuckers.